One of the best all-around marksmen and to play in almost all metas ever since his release has been Jhin. Jhin is one of the few champions that was released as a strong champion off the get-go and hasn't since left the meta for long periods of time. Therefore, he's a great marksman to pick up and invest time into learning him into your efforts to climb the ladder. Jhin is an interesting champion because of his adaptability, which can come in handy as games progress. His adaptability is also why he's been able to stay in a pretty healthy position throughout the meta shifts over the years. Because of his ability-focused kit, he tends to be played as a utility marksman. While his basic attacks are absurdly powerful, the ability design and combination with his basic attacks make him as potent as he is. In this video, we will go everything you need to know to try Jhin out and highlight some of the beauty in his design along the way. In the description below, you'll see a quick rundown of the video sections with the timestamps featured, but I'll list them first so you know what's coming. First, we'll review Jin's champion identity and where he fits among his peers in the marksman role. Then we'll review his abilities, rune and build options, combos, and helpful ability tips, lane matchups, support pairings, and general playstyle in each stage of the game. Before continuing the video, if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe for more content like this. Starting with champion identity, in terms of his design, I don't think there is a single player who doesn't appreciate what Jhin is. Of course, some will hate what he's capable of, but that's just like any marksman. His role as a marksman is primarily of utility, following up on engages and essentially dancing around the battlefield on a knife's edge. To pilot this champion effectively, the player must be quick to think and always prepared to run, as Jhin is incredibly vulnerable to crowd control. Without an item like Gale Force, Jhin has to use flash to essentially stay away from most threats once they are on top of him. As a result, he needs to build and play well from a distance. This is where the utility-focused identity comes into play. Jhin wants to assist his teammates in locking down and isolating enemies until it's safe for him to move in for the kill. Overall, Jhin is an excellent champion to fill a similar void in the team composition as Ashe does, just with a little more burst and firepower instead of the heavy crowd control that Ashe offers. Jhin is an ideal pick when the team has already drafted some form of damage per second that can help with the killing objectives and shredding through tanks if the game goes late enough. Thus, the damage is not always the primary focus of this champion. So let's start by reviewing his abilities. Starting with his passive Whisper, Jin's passive forces him to only hold up to 4 bullets in his weapon at a time. In doing so, he packs more of a punch, and his final bullet deals bonus damage in the form of a crit with an executing bonus. When critting an enemy, Jhin gains a burst of movement speed, and this part of his passive is probably the most underrated because it allows him to kite out and retreat to safety while reloading his weapon. Moving on to his Q, being Dancing Grenade, and it's a point and click ability that throws a grenade at the selected target, dealing damage and bouncing to any nearby enemy within its radius for up to 4 times. The beauty of this ability is that with each bounce killing an enemy, the next bounce deals more damage than the last. If each bounce kills the enemy, the final bounce will do an absolutely insane amount of damage. Especially in the laning phase, it is good practice to line up to 3 low health minions to start the bounce and try to get the 4th to hit your lane opponent, and this gives you a massive trade win essentially. Moving on to his W, being Deadly Flourish, and this is a long range and very narrow skill shot. This passes through all enemies but basically stops at the first enemy champion hit. If the enemy champion that was hit has recently been hit by Jin's teammates, tagged by Jin's E ability, or been damaged by Jhin, they will be rooted in place. This ability is the best way for Jhin to follow up and CC abilities from his support. As Jhin, you barely want to use your Deadly Flourish unless it's really worth following up on. The ability is pretty valuable not to have available for these opportunities. Moving on to his E, which is Captive Audience. So this places a lotus trap that blooms when an enemy walks over it, and while in the blooming animation, it slows enemies and basically explodes, dealing significant damage. As a bonus, whenever Jhin kills an enemy champion, the lotus trap will bloom when the enemy dies, so can crave for some interesting threats. And now onto his hallmark ability, being Curtain Call. So this is where Jhin transforms his weapon into a massive cannon, and like his weapon, it can fire up to 4 shots, but this travels in skill shot form like his Deadly Flourish. Just like his Deadly Flourish, these bullets pass through enemies hit, but stop at the first enemy champion hit. His 4th and final bullet is guaranteed to crit again and deals execute damage that can add up to over 1,000 damage into later stages in the game. Now with the basic ability information out of the way, let's go over optimal rune and item choices for Jhin. As I've previously mentioned, Jin's runes and items vary by patch with whatever option is best for him. Right now, there are 2 options for his runes and builds. The first rune page option is Fleet Footwork for players that want to play a crit Jhin. Fleet Footwork is definitely going to be the more consistent option that will help you stay alive for longer. Both the small heal it provides and the movement speed are fantastic for kiting and synergizing well with Jin's passive since it uses so few autos. I should also note that since Fleet Footwork scales with AD in particular, and Jhin is a specific ADC, specifically the interaction between Fleet Footwork scaling with AD and the fact that Jhin gets way more AD than a normal AD carry makes it a really good option for Jhin in general. To pair with this keystone, Jhin should take Presence of Mind, Legend Bloodline, and Coup de Grace. Jin's kit is so particular because there aren't even really many alternative options within the precision tree that are worth considering. As for the secondary tree, however, several options depend on how you want to play Jhin. The most common pairing is the Inspiration tree with Biscuit Delivery and Time Work Tonic or Cosmic Insight. If you're stuck trying to decide decide between Time Warp and Cosmic, consider the lane matchup and if it's going to be a difficult one to sustain through. If it is, you can take Time Warp Tonic, but if not, the item haste from Cosmic Insight will come in handy for things like Gale Force. The alternative secondary tree options are things like Sorcery with Absolute Focus and Gathering Storm, or Celerity and Gathering Storm. The decision comes down to whether you want to deal more damage or live longer by kiting easier. A final more greedy secondary tree is probably going to be with Domination, with a Taste of Blood and Treasure Hunter deck. This is generally not worth it in most games, but probably won't provide much value unless you're confident you're going to Smurf and carry. The other alternative rune page worth considering for Jhin is the Dark Harvest page. It's very popular for Jhin players that like to build lethality instead of crit strike, so you'll take Taste of Blood, Eyeball Collection, and Treasure Hunter in the Domination tree with this page. The best secondary tree option for this is Presence of Mind and Legend Bloodline, which rounds out your sustain options. When taking Fleet Footwork, the best build for sure is the crit strike build. For this, Jhin will want to build Gale Force first, then build Swifties, Collector, an Infinity Edge, or Rapid Fire Cannon. Building IE will provide a lot more damage, but requires you to use your basic attacks more, and therefore play closer to the fight. RFC allows you to basically stay at arm's reach and take a little longer to take down your opponents. Regardless of the choice though, you'll want to build the other one as your fourth item, and then finish your build with a situational item. The most common options are things like GA, Lord Doms, Mercurial Scimitar, Maw of Malmortius, or even things like Bloodthirster. When taking Dark Harvest, the most optimal option is with lethality items. The lethality build should have Jhin start the game with a longsword and pots. This will help him reach his serrated dirk and eventually eclipse faster than starting with Doran's Blade. After completing his mythic, Jhin should build Boots of Swiftness and Umbroglaive. The final core item in this build is most likely Lord Doms. So this 3-item power spike will help Jhin deal insane damage to anyone in the mid game, regardless of their defensive stats. From here, Jhin kind of transitions into a crit strike type of build with RFC and IE to scale better into the late game. This is the optimal path to ensure he stays ahead of the curve against other late game hyper carry marksmen, basically waiting to come online. If Jhin is against a squishier team and is insanely far ahead, he can instead finish his build with Collector instead of Lord Doms and go things like Yomu's and GA. Now onto some combos and some helpful tips with Micro. Jin's a pretty simple champion all in all. Any combo you're planning to use should end with the 4th basic attack because of the bonus execute damage. Of course, this can also be done with the 4th shot of Curtain Call instead, but we won't really consider that a combo. In lane, I would say it's important to buffer Deadly Flourish's animation by using it right after an ability or attack animation. The most common way to do this is to basically attack and then just immediately W the enemy to root them in place. Another option that requires some forethought is to set up a well-placed trap so that the moment they activate it, you can W them to root them and then take the trap explosion damage as well. A great damage trade is to use the bouncing of Dancing Grenade so that the 4th bounce will hit an enemy and then time Deadly Flourish to hit and root them right after the grenade tags them. When combined with a heavy CC support like Thresh or Nautilus and things like that, Jhin should place a trap lining up with that support's CC. This will help trigger the trap and line up with the positioning there, and Jhin can follow up while they are still CC'd by something like a Thresh Hook with his Deadly Flourish, and this locks them in place for the explosion. And not only does this chain crowd control effectively, but while this is still going on, Jhin can use an auto 2 and will likely have the opponent under half health at this point. As previously established, the lower health an enemy is, the better for Jhin because he can finish him off with Dancing Grenade and his 4th auto to execute. In this example, there's almost no chance for the enemy to even get out. Of course, if Jhin has Gale Force, he can use the active to get the enemy even lower and then finish them with the 4th auto attack and then at least close the distance to get the final auto attack off. Once Jhin reaches level 6, if all of that doesn't kill the enemy and start to escape, then you can probably start using things like Curtain Call to snipe the last few points of health they have, while basically remaining unscathed. Now onto matchups. Jhin is one of the few bot laners in the game that really isn't phased by any single bot laner. Instead, his difficulties lie more in the enemy support and jungler. Because Jhin is incredibly vulnerable to crowd control, any support that can easily set up a gank with a good CC is challenging for Jhin to deal with. A great example would be a support and jungle pairing of things like Nautilus and Volibear. Pairings like this essentially result in death with one misstep, so it's important to understand how to play out the lane if you find yourself in a game like this. Jin's best matchups are into bot laners that are pretty squishy, like Sivir, Caitlyn, Aphelios, and Xayah. All these champions need longer trades to compete with Jhin, but Jhin should be able to back out of a trade easily after winning. In these matchups, as long as Jhin is not reckless with his Deadly Flourish and saves it to follow up on a support engagement or kite away from enemies, Jhin will be more than capable of thriving in the laning phase. Let's quickly touch on some good support pairings. Because of his unique design, Jhin actually performs quite well in lane in most matchups and instead is inhibited more by the enemy support in jungle. A good idea for a support to pair with Jhin is one that can disengage when these ganks are initiated to shut him down. Champions that fill this duty effectively are things like Zyra, Bard, Janna, or Zillion, things like that. What's even better for Jhin is one that can simultaneously engage on enemies when the opportunity presents itself. Jin's follow-up and raw stat power make all-ins very reliable when set up correctly. So some great engage supports include things like, the classic Blitzcrank, Nautilus, Thresh, Leona, things like that. All of these supports have the option to play aggressively and punish mistakes while also having the buffering available to escape from ganks. So let's move on to how to play each stage of the game. Starting with early game, we have already covered the ideal playstyle for Jin's laning throughout this video, but we will officially cover it from start to finish here. If you're playing crit Jhin, you'll want to start with D-Blade, and if you're playing Dark Harvest, you can start Longsword with potions. Regardless of the playstyle you have, you'll want to keep your trades short because of his bullets. The best way for the Marksman to compete with Jin's trades is prolonged trades that take advantage of him reloading or when his abilities are down. Now remember, ideally Jhin doesn't want to use his W unless he was following up on someone, so that basically means he has one less ability to trade with. Additionally, in the early game, Captive Audience Lotus Traps should only be used to act as a tripwire for enemy ganks. If you use it too often, you'll run low on mana too quickly. There are even some cases where you could delay leveling up a point into E until points like level 8 because you just don't really need it that early. The only ability that Jhin will really be using is his Q, Dancing Grenade, so there's not many chances for enemies to initiate trades where Jin's abilities are down, and thus Jhin has a good chance of winning in these short trades. On the topic of Dancing Grenade, it's important to also not use it too often, or Jhin will just run out of mana too fast anyway. It's very satisfying to clear 4 minions with one ability, but if you use this way too often, it's not really worth it. Now into mid game. Again, regardless of the build you really opt for, you're filling more of a utility role than most marksmen. This means that you want to rotate between lanes to assist with whatever skirmishing occurs quickly. You can follow up quicker than most ADCs because of the range on your W, which provides a lot of lockdown to help others secure a kill or make a great escape. This is also a great time to use your curtain call for the same reasoning. On a more proactive note, Jhin can shadow laners in a side lane sometimes or when rotating mid so that he can follow up engage with his Deadly Flourish and curtain call. The late game is a pretty big toss up with Jhin, unless you're already much further ahead of the enemy team and just looking to close it out. The reason being is that while Jhin does pack a punch, he lacks the DPS needed to compete with other marksmen that thrive in these late game environments. Moreover, his lack of escape, aside from raw movement speed, makes him way too susceptible to crowd control, that pretty much can make you lose the game if you get caught. It's critical to keep your distance and use your abilities wisely. You can pretty much two-shot any carry, but at this stage of the game, those frontliners are quite terrifying for you. To conclude, Jhin is a fantastic champion in both design and gameplay. He was one of the most revolutionary champion designs when he was first released back in February 2016 and has withstood the test of time today with little to no major changes. I highly recommend picking him up as he's always a viable option within the meta with the right runes and build. If you can get used to playing a marksman without always using your basic attacks, Jhin will be an incredible tool in your arsenal. As always, I hope this guide has helped you out and I will see you in the next one. Stay fresh.